This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. A trial in Baltimore, a political crisis in Chicago, and a nation focused on police and community relations. Law professor and civil rights historian Michael Higginbotham says just because police have a difficult job to do doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable when things go wrong. Political analyst Ed Kilgore says the Black Lives Matter movement will help solidify minority voters and their allegiance to the Democratic Party. And Bill Press talks with climate change expert Joe Romm. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Law professor and civil rights historian Michael Higginbotham says he's hopeful about progress in police and community relations, but that cops should not get a pass just because they have such a difficult job. And we say hello to Michael Higginbotham, law professor at the University of Baltimore, specializing in constitutional law and human rights. He's also the author of the book, Ghosts of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. Professor Michael Higginbotham, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
And nice to have you with us, of course. What is your view, as an expert on race relations, as to the mood of the country after all these incidents of police conduct captured on social media?
Well, it's certainly been very difficult to watch many of these incidents. It's just a real tragedy when life is lost, and there doesn't seem to be a good reason for that. I think the mood of the country is one that these kinds of incidents must stop, and they must stop now. They're unacceptable, they're un-American, and I think that minorities knew that many of these things were happening, that excessive force was being used by the police in minority communities at a much greater degree than it was used in other communities. And I grew up in Los Angeles during the 70s and 80s, and this was a real problem in Los Angeles. There was real difficulty between the Los Angeles Police Department and many minority communities at that time. And so I think that what you're seeing now with the release of many of these videos, what you're seeing now is that not only are minorities upset, but I think you're seeing many whites who were unaware that this type of excessive force and difficulties with police community relationships, that you see a lot of whites now recognizing that this is going on through these videos. And I think they're catching up with minority communities that knew these things were happening. And I think it's sort of like the civil rights struggles in the 1960s when Bull Connor and sort of other police officers in the South, used excessive force against peaceful protesters. I think the white community said, this is unacceptable. This has to stop. And I think that's what you're seeing now. I think you're going to see minorities and whites getting together and saying, these are unacceptable practices. They need to stop, and they need to stop now.
Now, as a law professor, are you troubled when the judicial process frees someone accused of police brutality, and conversely, when an officer is pilloried for making the wrong life or death decision?
I'm absolutely troubled because what's most important is that we have equal justice that is provided in this country. And I think both of those examples highlight a very difficult situation. Being a police officer is a very difficult job, and I think it's very important that all Americans, particularly minorities, understand the difficulty of that job. On the other hand, just because you do a difficult job, doesn't mean that you get a pass when you mess up. Doesn't mean you get a pass when you are in violation of policy or of law. And so I think it's very important because I am troubled by a lot that's been going on. But I think it's very important that we understand it's a difficult job, but that police officers also understand that there has to be consequences when you violate policy or when you are negligent on your job. There must be consequences. And so, yes, I'm troubled, but I am hopeful that we're going to have some improvements in the process.
Turning to politics for a moment, what's the situation regarding Republican attempts to keep people from voting and any Democratic attempts to block them?
Well, it's a very sad situation. I've talked about these new laws on voting, voter ID laws, very, very excessive laws on voter ID and other restrictions on early voting. And to me, it's very troubling. It's a very sad situation because I think Republicans have made a big mistake. And if you look at all of the states that are passing these restrictive laws, they're basically states that have Republican governors and a majority of Republican legislators. So I don't think that we need to hide that fact that this is a very partisan issue. And I think Republicans have made a big mistake because we shouldn't be, unreasonably restricting individuals from participating in the democratic process. We should be democratizing our process. It's not a good way to win in a democracy by making people ineligible to participate. And so I think the Republicans have made a mistake. Look, what should occur is a vigorous debate on what are the best policies, practices, and laws that we should have in this democracy. But you shouldn't try to win an election by reducing the people that are going to participate in the election. And I think, that's what Republicans are doing. I think what you're going to have a number of states where these laws are going to be examined by the state courts as well as the federal courts. And I think that many of them are going to be struck down as a violation of the Constitution.
We're speaking with Michael Higginbotham, law professor at the University of Baltimore, author of a book called Ghost of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. Did black elected officials make a deal with the devil when in recent decades they allowed Republicans to gerrymander congressional districts to give minorities single safe seats in exchange for more white-controlled Republican districts?
Wow, that's a loaded question there. While I am,
and that's why we have you with us.
While I'm a loyal Democrat, I don't want to say that the Republicans are the devil, but I do believe that we need much more diversity in terms of jurisdictions. We need to be encouraging the need for coalitions, and I think what we have now are very, very safe seats, both Democrat and Republican, because of this gerrymandering. And I think that I think we really need to, both Democrats and Republicans need to do a better job in terms of encouraging, activism and involvement and mobilization in terms of having to build coalitions, between Democrats and Republicans, between conservatives and conservatives and liberals. And so I think it would be much better to have much more diverse jurisdictions. And I would hope that both Democrats and Republicans would attempt to implement that in the future.
I wonder, I don't know what you do because we becoming more and more divided, it seems. And so it seems that you would have to do is get everybody to agree, all right, we need to change the way we've been doing this. We need to make this more fair for everybody. How do you get over that hump where we're becoming more and more divisive as time moves forward?
Well, I think you're correct. We are becoming more and more divisive, and I think part of it is a mindset that we need to understand that we're all part of this democracy. We're all Americans, and we want to make the country a better place for all of us. I think so. One, it's a mentality, but two, we also need to set up mechanisms that encourage people to work across party lines. And what we have with the setup now is that we're not encouraging people to work across those lines. The way it's set up now is we're encouraging them to be more politically divisive, not to work together. And so what I would like to see, and this is what I talk about in my book, Ghosts of Jim Crow, in terms of one of the reforms, one of the ways we can make the political system better, is that we should take the redistricting process away from the politicians and have independent commissions do the districting process. Right now, it's generally in the hands of legislators, and most states allow that. There are a few states that put it in the hands of independent commissions, and I think that's the better way to go, because I think you're going to get a redistricting process in those states that is a little bit more objective, that is less partisan, and that encourages jurisdictions where people can work across party lines.
Of course, I've mentioned you're a law professor at University of Baltimore, so there is your home city. Martin O'Malley, how is his record as mayor of Baltimore and governor of Maryland going to affect his chances of either president or vice president, you think?
Well, you bring up an interesting candidate, Governor O'Malley. He was an excellent mayor, and he was an excellent governor, excellent Democrat in a strong Democratic state. He was very strong on education. He supported higher education in Maryland as governor, and he was very strong in terms of law and order when he was mayor here in the city of Baltimore. Now, I think he's having trouble, in this presidential bid. And part of that, I think, is that all candidates, have to run on their record. And while Governor O'Malley had a strong record in many respects, he was very controversial in terms of the law and order aspect, particularly when he was mayor in Baltimore. He had, a stop and frisk policy that he claimed, reduced crime. But that others claimed that it exacerbated tensions within the minority community. And I think that's something that you saw taking place in New York as well, and sort of other major cities that had this stop and frisk policy. I think Governor O'Malley is having trouble with the presidential campaign in terms of getting support from minority communities because of that record. It is a controversial one. And I know he's defended it, during the campaign. He's talked about how he reduced crime in the city of Baltimore. But what he's got to do, I think, is not only let people know that, he's strong in terms of education, he's strong in terms of law and order, but he also has to let people know that he's committed to equal justice. And I think that's what he's running into with, the Black Lives Matter, supporters. He's running into that issue where they're not convinced, and he hasn't, I think, demonstrated that strongly, that he's as committed to law and order, that he's as committed to equal justice for all as he is in terms of law and order. And I think that's the challenge that the governor is going to have. He also has a challenge in the sense that he's not viewed as the alternative to Hillary. And I think that, the bigger problem he's run into is that Sanders is viewed as the alternative. And so he's got to, I think, make a strong pitch that he's the alternative, not Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton.
Moving across the aisle and talking presidential candidates, Ben Carson rocketed to fame as a neurosurgeon in your city of Baltimore. How do you explain the phenomenon of his political rise, and why some people, like Carson himself, oppose government programs that actually help them achieve success?
Carson has a great personal story, no question about it. He came up impoverished, raised by a single mother. and became, one of the top neurosurgeons in the world. So it's a wonderful story, which I think all of us, can take pride in. On the other hand, as a politician, I don't think that he has, been received well, except by very conservative Christian evangelicals in the Republican Party. I think Carson's issue is that he's going to have real trouble resonating if he was to become the nominee of the Republican Party. He's going to have real trouble resonating with moderate Republicans, with independents, and definitely with black Democrats. And you mentioned, how do I explain this phenomenon? I think that the explanation is that he resonates with those who believe in his political philosophy, which is a very, very conservative one. And I think his problem is going to be that black Democrats would be very, very unlikely to support his candidacy should he be the Republican nominee. There's no way that he'll get much of a crossover vote from black Democrats. Unlike, I think, some Republicans, sort of moderate Republicans, sort of Colin Powell type Republicans, who take positions on abortion, take positions on affirmative action that resonate with a lot of blacks in this country. And so I think Carson will have he's a great surgeon, but I don't think much of him in terms of his political positions. And I don't think that many black Democrats, I think they feel that way as well.
All right. And before we let you go, and we'll make this a little more local now, Democratic senatorial primary coming up in Maryland, and geography and possibly race could be factors in the outcome. What are your thoughts and or predictions?
Well, it is an interesting political race, sort of a battle of the titans, because you have two outstanding members of Congress. You get they're both strong liberal credentials. They're popular with their constituents. They're articulate. They're personable. The unusual aspect, though, is that neither is from the Baltimore area. They're both from outside of the D.C. area, and so there's a real battle to get those from the Baltimore area to support one or the other. And I really think that whoever is most successful in terms of that outreach is probably going to be your next senator from Maryland.
Oh, come on. Really? You're not going to give us a name?
do I have to pick one to put on my crystal ball?
You don't have to, but I was sort of hoping you might.
I think.
Do you have a sense of one that might be kind of, regardless of what the polls are saying at the moment? Do you just sort of have an inkling of, gosh, I think candidate X, without naming them, Van Hollen, Edwards?
Well, I think Van Hollen is probably the leader right now, and is probably likely to win. I think that Edwards is going to have to run a really, really strong campaign, and is going to have to be extremely successful in the Baltimore area in order to win. So I think Van Hollen's probably the bet right now, but no question, they're both really strong candidates, and I think that the Baltimore area is really up for grabs because neither candidate is really well known in this area. And so to me, that's going to be the battle, and I think the person that wins a real significant majority here in Baltimore will win the election.
Okay, fair enough. Michael Higginbotham, law professor at the University of Baltimore, author of the book Ghost of Jim Crow, Ending Racism in Post-Racial America. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us. We appreciate it and look forward to having you back again soon.
It's my pleasure.
And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Progressive policy analyst Ed Kilgore says new House Speaker Paul Ryan might offer a suspension of hostilities for a year, but that Republicans in Congress will continue to make empty gestures of sound and fury, signifying nothing. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Memo to future presidential candidates from Ted Cruz. 1. If you're going to issue an autobiography to promote your campaign, and 2. If your book highlights your father's heroic adventures in the 1950s Cuban Revolution as a testament to your own values and courage, and 3. If you're going to grandiosely title your book A Time for Truth, you really need to fact-check your father's old war stories, because if you don't, some snooping reporter will. Indeed, Jason Horowitz of the New York Times interviewed dozens of Cuba's revolutionary veterans and some childhood friends of Ted's father, Rafael. Turns out, Daddy was more of a fibber than a fighter. For example, in his frequent speeches for his son's campaign, Rafael enthralls Republican audiences with a vivid recounting of being a rebel combatant in the watershed Battle of Santiago, led by revolutionary hero Frank Pais. I knew Frank Pais personally, the elder Cruz says in his speeches. I saw him 12 hours before he was killed. Ted includes this dramatic moment in A Time for Truth, but there's no truth to it. Pais was not killed in that battle or in Santiago. He was executed elsewhere 7 months later by the Cuban dictatorship. And none of the veterans remember Rafael Cruz at all, nor could Rafael provide a single name to the times of the rebel comrades he claims to have fought beside. Also, Ted's book hails his father as a rebel saboteur, and Rafael's speeches are laced with flashy reminiscences of gun running and throwing Molotov cocktails. Again, though, when pressed by the Times, the yarn spinner could not come up with any specific acts of sabotage he performed or recall any targets of his cocktail tossings. This is Jim Hightower saying, no wonder Ted is infamous as a prevaricator, con artist, and outright liar. He's a chip off the old block.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Columnist Ed Kilgore says the Black Lives Matter movement eventually will help solidify the relationship between minority voters and the Democratic Party. And we say hello to Ed Kilgore, political columnist at New York Magazine and longtime commentator on progressive politics, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Ed, thanks very much for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Now, you watch Congress closely, of course. Does the elevation of Paul Ryan to the speakership of the House, does that bode well or not for progressives, or even for the whole country for that matter?
Well, it seems to have bought some time and convinced conservative rebels, at least for the moment, in the House, to bide their time and wait on the election results before pitching the kind of temper tantrums that might really damage their cause in 2016. But that's about it. It's it's sort of a stay rather than any sort of real solution, because the underlying dynamics in the Republican Party have not changed.
Now, you wrote recently that just because a 2-year budget deal was enacted when Ryan was made Speaker doesn't mean an end to gridlock. So what do you think we can look forward to?
Well, there may be sort of a suspension of hostilities between now and the peak of the 2016 elections, though I think we can regularly expect Republicans to make all sorts of empty gestures, sending legislation to the president that they know he'll veto. But that's sort of a sound and fury signifying nothing, except insofar as it shows us the kind of legislation they would definitely enact if they succeed in winning the White House and hanging on to Congress in 2016.
Is that just a smoke and mirrors type of thing right now until we get through the election and it's their hope that they, in fact, have the White House? So it seems like, in other words, it seems like they're doing something.
I think given the dynamics of the presidential nominating contest in the Republican Party, I think they're also trying to convince unhappy conservative voters that they are not, that they're not complicit in, in the failure to reverse, the Obama policies that the rank and file hate. They want to try to make it clear that, were it not for Obama himself, they would send the country in a very, very different direction. Now, having said that, I don't know how effective that'll be, since people aren't stupid. They realize that Obama, that they know Obama was going to veto all these bills, so they are really gestures. So it'll be interesting to see if they persist in this and what, if any, effect it has on angry and unhappy conservative voters.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are a number of experts, including those on the progressive side, seeing some benefit in the rise of regular order conservatives in the House because it would restore congressional primacy in government. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I don't necessarily think we need congressional primacy in government. I do think it would be helpful if Congress could do a little more lawmaking and not force whoever the president is to act as much by executive order. But I'm not sure that regular order is necessarily a solution to the problem. There's still ways to gum up the works and get very little done without, the sort of extraordinary dramatics we have seen when regular order was suspended.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Ed Kilgore, political columnist at New York Magazine, longtime commentator on progressive politics. It brings up an area in which some on the far right and some on the far left agree, whether Congress must approve foreign military adventures. But isn't it a matter of Congress not wanting to take a stand on military interventions that might go wrong?
That's a big part of the issue. That and the party of whoever happens to control the White House at any given moment tends to defer to the president. And frankly, the two parties have not been terribly consistent on this particular point. But again, I mean, part of the issue here is that through the War Powers Act and other precedents, Congress has really delegated its own war-making of powers to the presidency over time. So I really do think that the complaints about any given president's imperial powers are A, partly partisan, and B, something that Congress could do something about if it really wanted to.
For 30 years or so, we've seen Republican moves to give minorities safe seats in return for even more white majority Republican districts. Was that a fatal mistake by Democrats, guaranteeing a Republican lock in a gerrymandered House for the foreseeable future?
Well, I actually, as a fairly close student of this phenomenon over the years, I think that may have been true 30 years ago. The 1980s redistricting process, where actually you had a very explicit alliance between Republicans who were then in the Justice Department and African American Democrats, or at least incumbents, who wanted to maximize the safety of their own seats. The subsequent redistricting cycles, that really hasn't been the situation or the problem. The the real problem for Democrats is, other than the failure to control the last cycle of redistricting, is that Republican votes are more efficiently placed. So you almost automatically have sort of a surplus Democratic voters effect in Democratic districts and not so much on the Republican side, which is why, Democrats actually have to do significantly better than 50% to control the House. But I really don't think the racial gerrymandering is quite the issue it once was.
And yet people still seem to make noise about it. So where does that come from then? Why are we still having that conversation?
I actually don't hear any noise about it. I do hear about Republicans being in bleached districts and catering only to white voter concerns, because that's a fact. But I don't believe there's this sort of alliance that produces majority black districts and white districts is really happening much anymore. So I actually don't hear a great deal about racial gerrymandering. And in fact, of course, at the moment, the Supreme Court has suspended the primary tool for doing just that, which is Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, is all but inoperative thanks to a U.S. Supreme Court decision. So I think we may have other problems, or Democrats may have other problems with districting. The biggest one, again, being the very poor position of the party in state legislatures the last redistricting cycle. The good news is that the next redistricting cycle will occur after a presidential election, when in recent years Democrats have done significantly better.
Okay. Now, before we let you go, the Black Lives Matter movement, is it going to have an effect in Democratic primary races for president or Congress? And if so, a positive effect or a negative one?
Well, I think it's already having an effect, and I think it's a positive one. I think, we all sort of remember what happened during Bernie Sanders' first encounter with Black Lives Matter. And what we're already seeing, frankly, from the entire party and even to some extent the news media, is an understanding that, African-American issues, if you want to call it that, are best defined by African-Americans themselves. And certain issues, including police behavior and the criminal justice system, have simply been tuned out by even very progressive white folks over the years. So to the extent that white Democrats have a bit of a tendency to sort of take minority voters for granted, I think it sort of forced a real dialogue that was badly needed, and that in the long run, I think will help solidify the relationship between minority voters and the Democratic Party.
So a positive effect overall would be your outlook. Okay, great. Ed Kilgore, political columnist at New York Magazine, longtime commentator on progressive politics, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Ed, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to doing it again with you soon.
Absolutely.
All right, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with climate change expert Joe Romm about the recent international conference in Paris.
Joe Romm with Climate Progress, part of Think Progress at the Center for American Progress, has been our go-to guy on climate change ever since we've been doing this program, I believe. He's got a great new book out called Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know. And Joe joins us on our newsline this morning. Hey, Joe, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bill.
Yeah, so what's at stake in Paris with this two-week summit on the environment?
Well, there have been an annual conference every year for 21 years. trying to get the nations of the world to agree to limit carbon pollution, greenhouse gas emissions from burning coal, oil, and natural gas and deforestation. And for the first 20 of them did not succeed. And finally, it now appears that, prior to this, today, 150 countries have made serious commitments, including the U.S., China, the European Union, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, South Korea. And we are going to get off of the worst-case trajectory for carbon pollution. We're not on the, what's considered to be the safe trajectory of about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius, but this is a big turning point for the world.
So you speak of this as a fait accompli. Is that fair? Do we know that already?
Well, the way the United Nations processes work, and this is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. When people read about this in the paper, and this is the 21st Conference of the Parties, just to get those that lingo out that people may see in the paper, because it's a UN process. In theory, any one of the 190 or so member countries can say we don't agree, and then there isn't, unanimous agreement. I think so. It's always a guessing game at the very end, exactly how things will play out. But in terms of the countries making real commitments to change their trajectory of emissions and change off of dirty fossil fuels into cleaner renewable energies, that is there's been a lot of work done on that in the last year, starting all the way a year ago, November. You may remember, I think we talked about this deal between the United States and China.
Yes.
That was the breakthrough deal where China became the first big growing developing country to say, yes, we're also going to cap emissions in 2030, if not sooner. And that set in motion all these other countries that had sort of been hiding behind China, saying, well, if China's not going to make a commitment, then why should we, a smaller, poorer developing country, make a commitment? So, so there has been a year's worth of work, and I think President Obama, Secretary Kerry, and at the time, John Podesta, who negotiated that deal,
of course, deserve
a lot of credit. Is there still a lot to be worked out? Absolutely, because as you can imagine, there are a great many developing countries like India and smaller ones that have been imagining themselves growing the way that we did, which is by building lots of dirty fossil fuel plants.
Right.
And now we're saying, hey, you guys can't do what we did because that would ruin the climate. So they say, okay, well, if you want us to leapfrog you, you've got to provide some money, some technology help.
Right.
So this issue of the financing of that clean energy transition to the tune of, $100 billion a year, that was the commitment that was made years ago at Copenhagen, that the rich countries would come up with $100 billion a year by the year 2020, and needless to say, it hasn't fully materialized yet. So that is going to be, I would say, sticking point number one.
You, I'm sure, have seen either the Washington Post or the New York Times today. Both of them have the same photo of the horrific pollution in Beijing, a guy riding down the street on a bicycle, and you can barely see him through the haze and the smog. So is what China, how much can we trust what China has put forward as a plan?
Well, it's a very good question. I think I was in China at the end of June, and I got a chance to talk to most of the leading experts in and out of the government, and the air is as bad as people say.
Is it really? Yeah.
You and I would not let our kids out in such air, and frankly, we wouldn't routinely go out in such air. So it is because of the terrible coal-driven and dirty car-driven air pollution that China is, in fact, very serious about reversing its coal-based emissions trend, and they're shutting down coal plants, and they're switching over to an aggressive deployment of solar and wind. They're the world's largest manufacturers and consumers of solar and wind energy. So based on everything I learned over there, yes, they probably peaked in coal consumption in 2013, and I think you're going to see their coal consumption go down. I think you're going to see China beat its commitment to peak in 2030. Most everyone there thought they would peak by 2025 in overall CO2 emissions, and like I said, they may have peaked in coal emissions already, and they're going to build so many renewables in the next 15 years as part of their pledge. They're going to build the equivalent of the entire U.S. electric power system just in carbon-free power over the next 15 years. And so, yeah, I think that they are sending a signal to the world, look, renewables are ready now, and you can, if you choose the path that we did, you're just going to be building all these coal plants, screwing up the air and water of all your cities, and then you're going to have to shut them down anyway. So let's figure out if we can put enough money on the table and enough technology on the table to simply leapfrog the way so many countries never built the telephone lines but have gone straight to cellular telephones.
And that's what we hope that India will, that's the path that India will take as well, the other major player. Is that right?
Yes. And India is now the big focus of attention, because India has been eyeing China, and on the one hand, they like the rapid growth that China has had in the last 15 years. On the other hand, nobody really there wants to see their cities get even dirtier, because right now India has something like half of the top 30 most polluted cities in the world. So Modi is their leader, and he is walking this tightrope. He doesn't want to constrain growth, but also, India is going to suffer as much as anybody from climate change, because the melting glaciers will take away their water supply, and the rising seas is going to inundate their coasts. So they have pledged to be 40% renewables by 2030, a massive expansion in solar and wind, and they just announced a major international partnership with dozens of countries to accelerate solar deployment. So, they have not committed to cap CO2 emissions, and they're not going to do it at this meeting. I think there's hope that they eventually will do it, but as you can imagine, for a country that wants economic growth as much as it wants clean air, this is the big challenge. I think the good news is that they are at the table, and they don't want to be seen as the reason these talks didn't succeed.
And very, very quickly, if you can, what's the United States going to be doing that we've not already done in this?
Well, we have committed to increase spending on clean energy. Of course, that's our friendly neighborhood Congress has vowed that no matter the fact that the world has finally gotten together at our best shot at solving climate change, Mitch McConnell and members of Congress want to kill not just U.S. action on climate, but global action on climate. So there is going to be an epic battle, and I think it will be a pretty big election issue. This question of is the United States going to be part of the world effort to solve one of the greatest problems we've ever faced, or are we going to be a roadblock?
Yep, that's going to be the big issue for 2016. We saw the poll yesterday. 66% of the American people said they would support binding restrictions on global emissions. Joe, congratulations on the book. It's just out. It's called Climate Change. We'll have a link up on our website. You can also find, of course, at your local bookstore and on Amazon.com or any of the big book websites. Joe, great work, and you continue to turn it out, and we love having you on the show. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you.
Again, the book is Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know About It. Nobody knows more about it than Joe Romm.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Higginbotham, Ed Kilgore, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.